first it's biopunk, then it's transhuman, then you got, kaiju stomping around, and then you got what it looks like terrorist attacks, and it was like, what's going to happen next?
Hello everybody and welcome back to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lana and I'm so excited about this episode because my buddy Rob here.
Hello everyone.
He read my book, so he gets to answer my questions. No more torturing me with Rob questions. All up to me this time and I am prepared. So before we get going, 10,000 foot summary, which is gonna be more like a 2,000 foot summary because I don't want to dig too much into it. This book is a murder mystery set in a biopunk setting, very Sherlock Holmes and Watson, but like very futuristic-y yet old school. I don't know, it's hard to describe that, but I think what's interesting about this book is we described it as a fantasy book in the beginning, but it really is just a murder mystery. Like, that's the big thing about it. There's not a massive magic system to talk about like we've done in the past. There's like kind of, sort of, but more with technology. And this story takes place with a young assistant investigator that stumbles in to his first job through interesting methods, which we won't no spoilers in this one. And he's working with an actual investigator who's been an investigator for a long time. So very experienced, but very mysterious. And she has very eccentric ways. So his very first case, unfortunately for him, is a very catastrophic murder of unusual means. And that's where the story gets very interesting. They try to solve the mystery, which leads into more mystery, and this whodunit case really becomes a bunch of whodunits, and in an unusual setting with leviathans, titans, if you will.
Yeah, is a very big mishmash of different genres of stories. But you didn't actually introduce the book yet. It is the Tainted.
No.
This is the Tainted Cup.
So it is. By Robert Jackson Bennett. Robert saving me again. So that was a good save. Thank you. The Tainted Cup. I love that we're not even going to edit that out. It's perfect. So, shall we start with your questions?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. What do you have for me?
Okay. I wanted to start off with one of my favorite elements of the book, which is actually the Watson-Sherlock Holmes dynamic, which is what actually sold me on the book. So I only went off of what I found online as far as new fantasy books coming out and what was printed on the jacket. So, and what caught me on this one was that it was a fantasy murder mystery, Sherlock Holmes Watson style. So since that's the reason I picked the book, what do you think about that element of the book?
I think it actually was very much the Sherlock Holmes and Watson type of story. The characters definitely embody all the kind of common stereotypes and tropes of those characters. The relationship between the characters and the way each one of them kind of acts very much feels like Sherlock and Holmes for me. But they still have their own unique twist. This is not just a copy-paste Sherlock Holmes into a fantasy setting. It is very much a unique characters. They're just obviously inspired by Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, I the parts that felt very, very Sherlock Holmes to me were I actually haven't read any Sherlock Holmes books. I should probably say that. But I've watched a lot of the series, from the old ones to the new movies to the Cumberbatch, I think that's his last name. I never say that right. Series, which I loved, by the way. And so in those moments where you see like the calculations forming above his head and he's thinking about it, and then he comes to kind of like this ha-ha moment where he's like, I bet you didn't see this, or I bet that got past you, or while you guys were sleeping I did this, kind of. And I feel like that definitely came through in the lead investigator. Her name's Anna, because she definitely has those moments, a little bit less in the beginning of the book, but it happens later in the book, where she starts to kind of do her are almost monologues, if you will. Like this happens in plays a lot, where often when the villain is confessing to what he did wrong, but in her case, it's like talking about what she did right.
Yeah. No, and I thought that was great where she would essentially just be like, here's what happened. And the people would just either have to deny it, and then she'd throw more evidence at them until they essentially convinces the room about how she's deduced the murder mystery of this part of the story. I especially liked how she would essentially, when she was doing that, she would actually, spew a bunch of evidence at someone and be like, "It was you the whole time in the observatory with the candlestick," and then the person would be like, "No, it couldn't have been me because I was over here," and then she would throw more evidence at them, and using all the evidence that you had already kind of seen in the story, but just putting all the pieces together.
And we'll talk more about writing style a little bit later. So I'm going to save some of that and I'm going to transition us into magic system, which we usually talk about. But there's sort of a lack thereof this time. But instead of magic system, we kind of touched on something that you've talked about in the past, which is sort of superhero or superpowers in a way. And in this book, they're not like born with it, like a mutant, kind of like Rogue the shirt I'm wearing, but instead they can choose. So in some cases, people choose to get grafted or infused or suffused, I think they say, become sublimes with different skin grafts, different blood transfusions even. I think there's all sorts of weird things that they can do. Eye drops, all sorts of stuff that will actually change or transmutate you, turn you into something else. But what I felt was very interesting about this is it seemed like in most cases, the person is choosing what they want to have done. I'm sure there's some cases where some people feel trapped into a decision, or maybe the government does even kind of make them. But I'm curious what you felt about this whole people can become as mutated as they want.
Yeah, I mean it's a common storytelling of transhuman stories where you essentially evolve people to be something beyond what a human is capable of being. And this story definitely does that, where people will be like, oh, I want to try to become a sublime, and which is basically all the different things that changes your mind. Whereas other people become the clackers, where they basically have their whole bodies changed. And then other people just have small changes, maybe less noticeable changes, because they don't want a big change, or maybe can't. It doesn't sound like this is even a cost, but by doing so, a price is being paid.
And sometimes very steep. Like this kind of reminds me of something that happens in today's day and age, which is like lengthening people who like to get taller, for example, where they use those devices on the legs, break their bone, and they can actually grow the bone and they lengthen their legs. But that takes like months, right? Like something like 6 months of like like intense pain. Like it's difficult. I've actually gotten on to one of those like when you're scrolling through shorts or whatnot and you dive into stories you didn't expect to find, and found myself in like a fascinating world of learning about these leg surgeries. So they talk about some of these transmutations or and how it was difficult for them, or how they had to survive it, or how they had to get through it. So it's not even just like magic, you have this cool power now, you have to suffer through getting the power. And Cole, our other main character, it seems like some of the ones that he had to go through to get like the powers, I don't even know if we should say powers, but that he has, took its toll on him.
Yes, and they make it clear that he's doing this in order to try to essentially better his family, to be able to get a government bureaucracy job so he can send money back to his family and maybe help them live a better life. So he's almost paying a price on behalf of his family members. And it sounds like that's the case for quite a few of the people, that they're actually getting these changes, not necessarily out of choice, but out of more of feeling like this is my best path forward. And I don't know, I really liked that element of this story, that the way these characters make these choices. Because there was even a character who they specifically said he has almost no changes to him, because they want to keep his genealogy pure because he comes from a more wealthy family, and so they don't want those changes to propagate in his family.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool element to this story. Just kind of those little tidbits that add another layer. And we might talk about this more later. But this actually is going to be a series, which I didn't really look into when I first chose the book. But this adds more complexity to this story. Is going to develop even more. But something you said leads me into wanting to talk about the world building a bit more, which is needing to provide for his family. Cole, one of our leads in the story. So in this story, you talked about this a bit in your halfway episode, but there's these walls, these rings that go around the center of the empire. And those rings are different kind of hierarchies. It's like societal hierarchies. And so he's paying for his family to have like a better life. But how did you feel about the setting of this story? How did you feel about the walls and the rings and the lands and how the authors set this all up?
So what I really liked about the setting is how everything kind of ties together. You have the graphs and the suffusions where graphs are basically just one-time changes, where suffusions were like substantial changes. And then you find out that essentially there's whole areas where they're farming these graphs, like almost as a form of agriculture. And then you find out like when the Titans fall, there's like chaotic, wild, mutations that happen in the vicinity of where a Titan dies. And so it kind of brings all those things together. It's all related. This feels like these aren't just like bolt-ons of random bits tossed into one setting. These are organic, no pun, but organically grown in the setting. It all kind of makes sense together.
So in this story, plants play a big part in this world building that we've talked about. The plants protect homes. They can actually grow around homes, and you have to use certain reagent keys to get through the plants, if you will. They react to certain reagents where they don't like them, so they'll part their ways, and you can enter a building, for example. Or in the case of this particular story, like the plants even are what kill people. And then there's a whole group of people who handle the contagions that are in the world, which essentially the contagions are just like plant life or different types of spores that come from plant life. And in some case, fallen titans because plants like to grow in their blood. But I guess I'm not trying to lead the question, but I thought the book was going to be more about the plants in the beginning because it talked so much about them. They were playing a large part in it. But how do you feel about how like this plant life and the tree sprouting out of the people, how it's essentially a murder weapon? Do you feel like they played a big part in the story?
I mean they're key to the setting itself. I think technically you could actually drop all of the biopunk elements of this story and the story almost still works. You just change out instead of, this, from the very first chapter, this poison that they use that basically causes a tree to explode out of your body. You just change that for arsenic, and this is just a Victorian, Sherlock type of story. So I think that it's not critical to the story. It could be dropped, but it definitely gives this story a unique feel because if someone were to say, well, I kind of like fantasy stories, but they're all the same. They're all Tolkien inspired stories. It's like, well, here's one for you that's completely different.
Very different. Like, it was really unusual. In fact, so unusual that a lot of people are having a hard time classifying what type of book this book is. All right. So this is classified as fantasy fiction. And then it has an interesting space that I haven't really seen before, like a hard line. And then it says detective and mystery fiction. It kind of gave it both. Yeah. And I'm curious what you think.
I don't have any problem with that. I think detective and mystery are both appropriate. Although, if anything, I think they're kind of the same genre. Detective being a subpart of a mystery. So I don't think the two are necessarily different.
Okay. Do you think this book can be classified as fantasy?
Um, Depends on the definition. The most popular definition of fantasy is that it has to involve magic. That's why, like, arguably Star Wars is fantasy because you have a magic using the Force.
Right.
That's a common argument when compare like Star Wars versus Star Trek. Is one is fantasy and the other one's science fiction. It's all happening in space, but there are some differences because one has magic, in quotes. Um, is this magic? I mean, we don't know where the Titans or the graphs and stuff originated. There is a religious system. Maybe there's some tie there that we just haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, which I question this quite a bit because I didn't mark it as fantasy at all, really. And we are a fantasy series. We're also a sci-fi series, but I definitely put this into sci-fi more than fantasy. And I also find it almost like futurism. But that's also confusing too. And we talked about this a little bit, but it's confusing kind of what time period this is set in because it seems very futuristic with what they're able to do, skin crafts, and even going into the mind and growing humans to abnormally large sizes, as we've talked about. But yet they still have a very antiquated system. They still have dirt and stone walls, and they still fight with swords. Thoughts on that?
So the way I kind of see it is, we know that from the books is when a Titan dies, there's some wild like mutations that happen in the vicinity of where the Titan died. And I really just see, for the most part, like maybe the early years of Titans is someone would get a mutation that was actually beneficial. It wasn't, awful or, terrible. And they'd be like, okay, let's keep doing that. And they refined it down to almost a science. Like, if we give these three things in this order, you will get, someone with big brain. Whereas if we do this group of them, you get, muscle bound dude. So it really is just kind of just science, just in a setting that hasn't advanced up to our technology level. They didn't need to, but essentially humans have been doing this forever. We've been doing it with plants and animals. We've been domesticating them forever, essentially using the same techniques. Find the thing you like and keep breeding that.
Yeah, but like domesticating Titan spores. Because it's like the plant life that comes off of it. It's so weird. It is sci-fi.
It definitely could be seen as sci-fi. I don't disagree.
I could see this as like a Twilight Zone episode.
But see, if the Library of Congress description definitely just said it's a mystery story, and let's stop there.
Okay. So I agree with you there. We're going to do something a little bit different on how we talk about rating the book and changing our methods a little bit today. So one last question before we get into that. Because this is a murder mystery, we've unraveled this. What do you think about the murder mystery itself?
I think the mystery was effective. I think the way, the complexity and the nuance of the mystery was actually very entertaining. I thought it was going in some different directions that turned out not to be the case. I think there was definitely a couple red herrings tossed out, or at least it felt like there were. I think for me, a couple of the solutions were a little less satisfying. But that doesn't mean they were bad. It was just that it was like, oh, that's it? Really? But it makes sense. Like, there was nothing wrong with that being the answer. It's just I was expecting, a deeper twist or something, but it felt realistic. In insofar as like you have this answer, and the answer is not as clear cut, or there's no mastermind behind the scenes as much, because they're like, well, it just seemed like a complex plan because it went to shit.
Yeah, kind of. And also now that we've kind of talked about like the time frame of it more and the way you worded it being like, oh, they're just scientists like coming up with these graphs and such. Now I can plausibly think about this as being like set in a much less modern time frame. Whereas in my mind, when I was reading the book, I was struggling with that, but you kind of cleared that up for me, which makes sense to me of why some of the mysteries ended up with, yep, kind of thought it was going to go that way. Like, you laid out all the steps very clearly, you laid out the path, it followed the path, it didn't divert. Okay, so some of that seemed not as satisfying, but other parts were. Definitely were. And I found that very interesting. So murder mystery for me was entertaining. Definitely. I was going to go straight into the new part of the series, but I'm actually wondering if we should rate the map first.
Okay.
Because the next part's going to be a new way to, or a way we're trying out. We're still testing things. How we're going to rate the book. So, map time?
Yeah, let's rate the map.
All right. Show me the map! So, we originally said there was no map, but there was. We didn't open the book and look far enough. I didn't open the book and look far enough. So we have the map, which we'll pull up for you. What did you think about the map, Rob?
I think this is a very... I think it's a very good map. It has a very realistic kind of feel to it. They note down like the states that are important, like the locations that are important to this story. That's all noted, and it kind of leaves room for growth in future books, by not, nailing everything down yet. I think that's fine. I don't have any issue with that, leaving room for that growth. But but explicitly putting down, here's all the important things for this story, locations, they're on this map. And that's great. I don't know, what do you think?
I hate this map. I'm like Rob in this episode. I am back to how you were on the first book we read. I hate this map.
Oh, why is that?
Well, it's boring. It's really boring. And part of this is we were chatting a little bit it's almost like a blooper reel sometimes before the episode starts. Maybe we'll put those together. But I have a serious complex with how big these Titans are. How they just kind of keep becoming. In the book, with no spoilers, we find like carcasses of Titans, and they've used bones and stuff for different things. So it's interesting. There's been a lot of them. I just thought the sea would be bigger. Is that weird? And maybe it is. This is just a small section of land. We actually it doesn't show that it's an island. It doesn't really show much of anything. This could just be one side of like a continent they're showing us. But like, I don't know. Can you show like a Titan's lair where they all want to hang out in the corner? Like, this is where they socialize? I don't know. I hate this map, but that's not the only reason. Well, other than it's boring. There's like no compass rose. There's nothing. I don't know. You know what?
I think where I have my biggest problem with the map specifically is it is falling into one of the common problems with many fantasy type maps, and that there's just one country. It's the entire continent as far as we're concerned. There may be something else, but we have no idea. There's no even hint that there's anything else out there but this empire. And
right.
I don't find that to be realistic at all, especially in this kind of an era. I mean, it makes sense why they would consolidate resources when you have giant monsters rising up out of the ocean every a couple times a year, but you need the resources to defend. But like, why isn't there an opposing group or an independent nation out there?
I don't know, but it seemed like not enough. I think I'm just left wanting with this map, and maybe that's how you're describing it, is sort of how I'm feeling. But I also have one major problem with the map, and it's similar to how I felt in the Swordcatcher when I mentioned distances traveled. There was this one part where in that book they were traveling past a big tower, and they talked about how like the companions would walk home, but then on the map that seemed very far away, and how are they walking that distance? And I struggle with one section. There is a city called Oipat in the book.
Yeah.
Won't go into that too much. We're being very spoiler free. And the way that they described this in the book, near the wall breach, there's a breach in the walls at some point, and they have that clearly laid out on the map. It says the Titan's Path. That's going to insinuate a wall breach anyway, so not giving too much away here. And it shows where Titans kind of want to come up on the land. And at one point, they go from that particular section, and they're investigating something. Won't go into it. And a certain member in the story, a certain character wants to walk back to Oipat. Like, he wants to go visit this area. And it never says how close this character is. It never says how long they've been walking, but it somewhat, you feel like this character's getting close. I don't know. I felt that way. Maybe they weren't this whole time, but it is really far away on the map. Way farther away than I felt they described this before.
So I understand your concern there, and like I said, this is, I think the map is, for me, the map was fine. It wasn't, there's nothing amazing about it. I don't really have any like glaring problems for me with the map. It was just, an okay map.
I'm shocked. I expected you to full on attack this map, and I'm somewhat disappointed and very glad I showed up today with my opinions. How often did you reference the map?
Once.
Okay, see, I looked at it a couple times just to find this region that they mentioned a couple times of this grouped, like, I don't know if you call them provinces or sections or territories.
Cantons.
Cantons, yes, that's it. But I did find, even though I did not find myself checking the map, I did find myself checking this page a few times, which we have pulled up. But just to reference, like, who was outranked who, what was going on. Yeah. Did you ever reference that?
That I actually did look at quite a bit because as frustrating as I found that page to be, because some of the like, why is Princeps like the second lowest title? Like that's a bad choice in my opinion, but that's that's where the word prince comes from. You would expect that to be, towards the top. And so it's counterintuitive, and so that's why I kept going back to that page, is because like they're constantly using rank. This is a real militaristic area, so rank is actually really important. So I did come back to that page a lot, but because the story takes place mostly in one location, almost entirely, little bitty travel here and there, but mostly it's in one location. That's why I didn't look at the map. I'm glad it's there, because it gives me an idea about the world, but, I really didn't have a need to reference it.
True. Yeah, definitely reference this military rings chart a lot more than the map. We stayed in that third ring pretty much the whole time, as you say. So how would you rate the map? Scale of 1 to 5.
I would say the map itself is a 2. It's just good enough. But I think the ranks was actually... adding in the ranks brings it up to a 3, because that actually was really important, and I'm glad that reference material was there.
So for the first time ever, I think, on this show, maybe I'd have to go back and check the VODs, but we agree on a map rating. I give it a 2. Yeah, it's a 2 map. I don't think that the military rankings are enough to justify rating the map any higher, though. I'm completely disappointed, so it's just gonna stay a 2. It gets no extra for that.
I was just going off of how useful the reference material was to me.
Well, it was very useful. So let's go into this next part where we're gonna actually rank the book, and gonna do it a bit differently, because this is gonna allow us to talk about different sections of the book more, without going too spoilery. So I wanted to talk about and rank different areas of book writing. This is something we haven't really done before, but something you and I have chatted about, outside of recording. So since we just finished a Mark Lawrence book, I thought we could start off with rating the prose of the book and how you felt about that.
I mean, so I want to make it clear. I really did like this story. But in our last couple books where you talked about like skimming, I found
You
myself.
didn't.
I not no. I didn't skim like pages or even paragraphs. I stopped reading the big words because
Oh.
like it became just kind of just irritating at a certain point. So sometimes in a book, like even the last two books that we just got done reading, we, there are challenging, unique words or unique ways of describing common things. And I'm cool with that. I'm, especially if it's adding to the setting. In this case, you know, like what was the word for their inquisition or their bureaucracy? It was like, I don't remember because it was so irritating and
Yeah.
unimportant to me. Like it didn't add anything. It became forgettable because it was like, oh, I see that word. I'm not even going to read it. I'm just going to pass on by. And I even felt that way not all, but quite a few of the characters' names, the side characters. It was like, no, I recognize. Oh, that's that weird, you know. And this isn't the first book that I felt this way. Like I felt this way about even like Dungeons and Dragons novels are famous for their elven names just being awful. It's just a mishmash of they're throwing out vowels and characters and apostrophes for no rhyme or reason, and it's irritating. But I found the proper nouns and stuff and some of the word choices in this book to be very frustrating. What about you?
Yeah. Same, big same. I find this author, although very entertaining, this has no. It's interesting. This isn't going to weight much on my book rating for me, even though we should average these scores I'm asking for. But this author, entertaining as they are, didn't write well. I don't sounds so mean, but like I just maybe it's because we came off of Cassandra Clare and Mark Lawrence and we had some flowery prose and some beautiful writing and gorgeous word building and points where like words just seemed to dance off the page. And there was in both of those writers in our last books, there was sections of the chapters I actually reread because I just thought it was interesting how they put it together. And my mind thinks, how did that person think to describe it that way? Almost like certain lyrics in a song that just stay with you because they interpreted something different than you did. And this author did zero of that for me. It all felt very plain, almost like, in a way, older. And that's because I think that he based a lot of his writing off old books. He mentioned growing up with old mysteries. And in some cases, like even when I read Agatha Christie, I still go back and read some of her books because I don't know, they're a classic. They're short. I can read them pretty fast. But I wouldn't say they're complicated in writing style. And I think to make up for it, he occasionally throws in some monster word. And instead of wanting to read it and look it up, which I did in the other two books that we read, I was like, it can't matter.
Yeah,
And I moved on.
and that's just how I felt about some of the words, and or like I said, like the princeps being the second lowest rank, or the people with their minds that they've been augmented. They're called the sublimes. It's like why that word? There seems like there should be something more self-evident in like the words that people would choose to describe in their own society, but I think the part that, as far as prose, that most frustrated me is when people are speaking, they kept saying the canton of this, the canton of that, the canton of this, and or the city of this, the month of this, the month of this, and at a certain point, it's like that's not how people talk. They're not going to be constantly saying the state of California. When you live in California, you don't constantly refer to where you are as the state of California or the month of June, the month of April. You don't constantly say it that way. But I think he was writing it that way because he was trying to help cue the reader on that this is a month. I'm talking about a point in time because I'm using a fancy word. Or I'm using this word for this, state, or it's a administrative district of some kind, the canton, which, like I think Switzerland uses that as their subdivisions. But I don't know. It's like people don't talk that way, and I found that irritating. And like I said, when I would just see like a word, and I'd be like, I'm not even going to try to sound it out, in my head. I'm just going to I know what it is. I'm just moving on. I was so uninterested in some of these word choices.
Yeah, I think if you don't like to read books that make your head swim with a bunch of words and you're just like 6th grade reading level, yes, then yeah, this book's for you. It felt like that. So I'll rate the prose first. I gave the prose a 2.
I would agree. Definitely, there's potential to be worse. There was nothing.
Yeah.
There was nothing bad about it. It's just I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, and I will say that based off the fact that we just came from beautifully worded books again. I think if I would have read this after, some of the other books we've read, I might have been a little bit more impressed with the writing style. So it just also had some very unfortunate timing. But let's go into the story in general, how you would rate the story and why.
The story as a whole, I think, was actually terrific. This has actually been one of the more fun books, I think, as far as the story that's being told. I had a great time reading this book. The way the characters were performing their investigation of the murder mystery, and then it looks like, oh, it might be getting worse, and then it kind of changes directions and it's constantly moving about. I thought it was just a lot of fun, and I had a good time with the story itself. I would solidly put this as like 4, like story-wise. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think we were due for something different. This was sort of an accident. I didn't mean to put us so clearly stamped in the mystery category. I really, really thought it was going to be fantasy mystery. And in that first episode where we introduced these books, I even said there might be some sort of psychic quality to this character, because in the jacket cover, they don't really talk about Anna too much. They just say she's weird, eccentric, she sees things with a blindfold. So I was thinking there was more fantasy here than there was. So having this be a complete accident, this is the happiest little accident, a little Bob Rossian in here, that we could have had, because I thought it was very pleasant. I found it very interesting in reading about the murders, how people would have gotten into a building, how they would have gotten on the grounds, especially with these crazy plants that grow over it that don't want to let you in. They're almost alive in a way. You have to use certain things to get past them, right?
Yeah.
So having all that said, like, the story itself was very unique, super interesting. I never knew what was coming. I'm like, this is like almost video gamey at times. There's a character called a Twitch in there, and Twitch is super fast movements. That's why the website Twitch is called that, like,
yeah.
Fast Twitch.
And that was actually one of the things that was amazingly named, and the clacker was really well named. But like when you get to some of the other stuff, like the Iodex, that's the name of the bureaucracy, and it's like, what? It's like, I'm sure if I look that up right now, it's probably a real thing, like a historical term. But it was like, just call it the Inquisition, or call it, the military intelligence. Like,
yeah.
Like I found the words frustrating, but the Twitch, that was one of the good examples. That actually was spot on. It exactly explained what it was trying to convey.
Yeah, and that's why I felt that's what kind of made this a page turner when we're talking about the story, because I really didn't know what was coming at me, especially with getting hit with biopunk so early. And in your midway, you say that, like, you kind of like missed the mark on this. Like, this is biopunk. And once I got to that point too, I'm like, what the hell? And then we move on, and so yeah, story for me kept me page turning. So solid 4.
Yep.
Which brings us to characters, because we're trying to keep these very spoiler free. We haven't dove too much into the characters, but they're very important to the story. We've had beautiful characters we've read so far. We're several books into our podcast series now. And then we've had some characters that didn't connect with us. So I'm curious how you felt about at least our two main characters. And if not them, who else stuck out to you?
So, the two main characters are both have very interesting stories to them. They both have interesting backstories and how they got to where they are. That really doesn't really get explained until essentially the book's over. I mean, that's basically the end, is when you actually kind of resolve those mysteries. So they're not left hanging for the next book, which is good. So the one thing about those characters is neither one of them is particularly likable to me. They're both very focused, straightforward type of characters. They for different reasons, and it's actually kind of well explained in the book. So the two characters I actually liked a lot more were Uhad and Miljan, which were two other characters that were part of the investigative team. One was the old engraver that kind of was serving as a mentor a little bit to our main character, and Miljan, which he's like a Legion swordsman that's kind of become an investigator. So he's seen different parts of the society. I actually found their characters to be a lot more compelling and pulled me into their stories a lot more, just because of the way their characters were written. They're a lot more social. They're a lot more engaging. Whereas our main characters are a lot more, standoffish. And which is absolutely explained and is actually good for the characters, but they felt very much like blank slates when they, personality wise. So for the characters themselves, I think it was all well done, but nothing really amazing. They were well detailed, well explained. I liked some and I didn't like other, or it wasn't as interested in others, even though they were written well. So I would just put this in the middle of the road as a 3.
Yeah, big same on the characters. I think that the lead characters, Cole and Anna, while they were very well thought out on paper. It's like almost if somebody were to make an essay and write about a character and think about all the things that could make this character cool, the author did that. Like really cool things about them. But none of those things super come across as being like adding to their character necessarily. Like, for example, I think it's either in the credits of the book or maybe it's even somewhere in the introduction on the book. It talks about Anna is really likes, it's almost like cannibalism. She's almost more like Hannibal Lecter. Like she likes raw meat. But no. The only thing I got from that is she likes raw meat. I never ever got Hannibal Lecter. I never ever got cannibalism. That is a wide swath of praising yourself when you say you wrote the character like that. No, you did not. They had a couple plates of some raw fish like once or twice, yeah. Right?
Well, and that was interesting because they never said meat. Like they always said flesh. She needs raw flesh.
Yeah, flesh. One time was fish, though. One time was. I remember it said rolled in oil and salt, and I found that interesting. I'm like, well, you described that fish a lot better than you described her, but okay. Yeah. Yeah, so I just feel that, like, on paper, these two characters are fantastic, but, like, show me how that affects her character. Like, show her get ravenous. She needs this flesh, right? Or him with some of his weird idiosyncrasies that we can't go into without spoiling like, a cool plot thing that happens. But he has, his abilities have perhaps affected some of his other abilities in a negative way. And it says this in the book. Once you start getting graphs or once you start changing yourself, sometimes to overwhelm a certain sense, others might get dimmed. So we see that in his character too. But I don't get something that causes a lot of frustration for him. We don't necessarily get out in feeling for him. He's a very muted character. Like he's going through some very difficult moments and I just want him to be like, God damn it, and punch a wall, Like, but no.
but one of the things that I kind of liked about that was initially I thought, oh, there's a mystery here because like they made it clear like he's terrible at lying. Like Anna sees right through his lies like every single time, and so a lot of times he actually is actively choosing not to talk because he doesn't want to give away something he's lying about. He's actually suppressing his response. And then you get into other scenarios where someone asks him a question and he just suppresses his response. And then someone else, and he suppresses a response. And so I was like, oh, there's a lot more hiding on. There's a lot more below the surface. Like he's got these, deep anger issues or something. And it just didn't pan out. Like it was just like, he is a very muted person. That was actually a really good description.
Yeah. I think the author has some room to grow with these characters because, again, on paper, they're great. Got some really cool, like, outlines. Like, I can imagine this author outlining these characters and then, like, looking at it and being like, badass. So, almost there. And then I agree with the supporting characters as well. Those were the two I chose. So he clearly wrote some of them very well. And I think the reason why I chose those is Uhad is also does the same thing that Cole does. And so you kind of get a glimpse into the future of what Cole's life could be. And I found that almost more of a cool character development in relation to Cole. So that added character to him without it being his character.
Yeah.
And then the additional support character, Miljin, gave me a interesting sort of father figure-y element to the story because he's much older. He instructs Cole a few times, shows him a few things, teaches him a few things, and we don't hear much about Cole's family. So I feel like with that character, I almost got a glimpse into Cole as well. So it's almost like he used those two support characters in particular to bolster up Cole, and I don't think it was intentional. That's just how it felt for me. So I give these characters a solid 3.
Yeah, so same there.
Yep, we're right on par here. Okay, so we've gone through the story, the prose, the characters, and you sort of talked about this in story, but I want to hear about, like, how would you rank this book on general, like, readability? Like, did you want to keep reading it? I'm going to give you an example of when, and this is documented in our series, when I texted you on the Swordcatcher where I'm like, oh my God, I'm on like page 190 and I'm dying. My brain didn't want to keep reading, okay? And there's other books you tear through. So in those terms, kind of, how would you put this book?
I think this
general fun.
Because of the just kind of cool setting and like, I was always like, be like, okay, are we going to get the kaiju now? I was really, amped up for that. I was like, yeah! But, unfortunately that didn't happen yet. But the series is called Shadow of the Leviathan. So as a series, I actually am pretty hopeful that maybe we're going to get a lot more of the Titans and Leviathans in later books. But as a concept, the story was fantastic. I was always like really kind of excited to see what was going to happen next. I never really was bored or anything. There was, a few parts where I was like, oh, I think I'm putting it together, at the same time as it's happening. I'm putting the puzzle pieces together. Sometimes I was right and sometimes I was wrong, and that's fine too. So overall, I think I was happy with this story. It kept me engaged, very engaged, even when I was skimming words that I didn't want to read. So
Fair.
I would say this is a 4.
Okay. Yeah, so it's tough for me. It's probably a bit more than a 4, but it's not a 5. This is where I give my famous halves. But yeah, gonna lead off with this is just a 4.5. And the reason I say that is I was able, if I did put it down a lot, which I had to for the first 200 pages because I was just very busy, and I picked it up where I left off, my brain was able to very quickly pick up where I left off. I didn't have to rethink about what happened, which actually could be a pro for the simple writing style because it was easy for me to just like look at the last paragraph and be like, oh yeah. And then actually I hate to say this, but I read the last 200 pages last night. Not because I was putting it off, but I just had a super busy week. And I tore through them. It wasn't a chore. And another time, it's like I tore through the first 100. I tore through the next 100, and then tore through the last 200. And it hardly took me any time. And it's just because it was like fascinating to read. And here it was coming next. So yeah, 4.5.
Yeah. No, it was a great overall kind of setting, and the way it just pulled you in, and it was like, what's going to happen next? Especially after the first couple chapters, and you're like, first it's biopunk, then it's transhuman, then you got kaiju stomping around, and then you got what it looks like terrorist attacks, and it was like, what's going to happen next? Like, I was really excited to see what was going to happen.
Yeah. So overall, you don't have to average the first ratings. It can be independent. Mine's going to be a bit independent. But what's your overall rating for the book?
Overall, I would actually just put this kind of in the middle of the road. There's, I don't think it's quite a 4, so I'm going to go with 3.
Okay. Okay.
I was happy. That's not a negative. 3 is I'm happy with this book. I'm glad I read it, and I would absolutely read the next book. I'm actually very excited for when the next book comes out, because I will definitely get it immediately, because this was a great read, and I'm hoping the next one is going to be even better.
So I'm giving this the highest ranking I've given a book. And not because I think it's better than other books. I don't think this is better than Swordcatcher. I don't think this is better than The Book That Wouldn't Burn necessarily. But I want to read the next one, which I have not been able to say outside of Fourth Wing. I'll definitely read the next Cassandra Clare, but that's only because I know she makes good worlds and she's a trusted author for me. Not because Swordcatcher was so amazing, but because I cannot wait. I'm like you. I'm like, what's gonna happen? What's Anna gonna do now? We're about ready to get her story, I think. Cool. I want to read the next one. So I give us a 4. I think this is a very recommendable book. It's a very readable book, and it's a book that I anticipate, the next one coming out again. So, and I give it a 4 on top of having said, prose is a 2. Characters are a 3. So sometimes the overall rating of a book doesn't have to be based off the parts that made it that way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, this was a great read, and I would actually recommend it to a lot of people. I have a couple specific friends that I think this is right up their alley, that I'm going to suggest it to.
And also airplane book. I say that a lot. You don't have to get so involved in it. You can drop it and pick it up even. It was just super readable. But this comes down to the last part of the episode. We're going to kind of skip over crossbows because there was none. So we're not going to put a lot of time into that. But I do have one last question for you before we wrap up.
Sure.
Very relevant to this book. If you could pick some sort of transmutation, what would you pick?
I think for this setting, I would probably do the Sublime route. So just get the expanded mental capacity. I think that'd be great. I think some of the other ones are just a little too freaky.
Okay, so you definitely wouldn't pick the Twitch.
the physical changes to pretty much everyone other than the Sublimes are a little too drastic for what I would want.
Okay, fair. So I think I would actually love something similar to what Anna has. So we haven't really talked about it, but she can read with her fingertips. She's very sensitive to that. So we read so much on this podcast. I love to read. I think it would be cool to pick stuff up. She can even read faint impressions. There's just some neat stuff like that. So and that I would pick, and then I think I would also pick something to augment my strength. I think I would just like to be super strong.
So the graft, not the suffusion of strength, because otherwise you just become giant.
Yeah. Oh, and on talking about grafts, we didn't really talk about this, but there's something that's very interesting about Anna as well, is she likes something called Moody's, which is basically a graft. That's a drug. I think it's like a psychedelic.
Yeah.
And they're temporary. They wear off. Yeah.
And that was definitely Sherlock Holmes inspired.
Yes. Super cool. So, all right, you guys, now that we've wrapped up what type of mutants Rob and I would be, we want to thank you for joining this episode. You've made a huge impression on us so far. We're starting to grow, and we really appreciate you. So join us in that Discord, like and subscribe this video, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you.